Before we begin this heartwarming story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our latest emotional stories. Now, let's dive into this incredible tale that touched hearts around the world. The morning sun cast golden light across the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered in their usual spots, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood the Morrison family, who had traveled from a small town in northern England for this special trip to London. They had saved for 2 years to make this journey, and today was meant to be the highlight of their visit. 8-year-old Emma Morrison sat in her wheelchair, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched the mounted guards on their magnificent horses. Emma had been born with a condition that affected her muscles and nerves, leaving her unable to walk. But her spirit was stronger than any physical limitation. She loved animals with a passion that amazed everyone who knew her. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of horses, dogs, cats, and every creature imaginable. She spent hours watching nature documentaries and reading books about animals, dreaming of the day she might touch a real horse. Her father, David, pushed her wheelchair closer to the barriers as the ceremonial guards approached. Emma's mother, Rachel, walked beside them, holding her daughter's hand. They could see the excitement radiating from Emma's face. Her younger brother, 6-year-old Thomas, jumped up and down, trying to get a better view. The family had talked about this moment for weeks. Now it was finally happening. The royal guards sat perfectly still on their horses, their red uniforms pristine and their expressions stoic. These were soldiers of the household cavalry, trained to maintain absolute discipline and composure regardless of what happened around them. They were living statues, symbols of British tradition and military precision. Tourists often tried to make them smile or react, but the guards remained unmoved, focused on their duty. One guard in particular caught Emma's attention. He sat atop a beautiful black horse named Wellington, whose coat gleamed in the sunlight. The horse stood 17 hands high, a gentle giant despite his imposing size. Emma watched the horse with such intensity that her parents noticed tears forming in her eyes. Rachel bent down and asked her daughter what was wrong. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. She said she had never been this close to a horse before. In all her 8 years, despite her love for animals, she had only seen horses in pictures and videos. Her condition made it difficult to visit farms or stables. The uneven ground and lack of accessibility meant that many places simply were not reachable for her. This moment, being just feet away from a real horse, was overwhelming in its beauty, and its reminder of everything she could not normally experience. David looked at his daughter's face and made a decision. He knew the rules. Signs everywhere reminded visitors not to touch the guards or their horses. He understood that these were working military personnel performing official duties. But he also saw the longing in his daughter's eyes, the pure desire to connect with an animal she had loved from afar for so long. He decided to ask, prepared for rejection but hoping for understanding. He approached the barrier and called up to the guard, sitting on Wellington. The guard, whose name was Corporal James Fletcher, remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as training demanded. David explained that his daughter had disabilities and had never touched a horse. He asked if there was any possibility, any chance at all, that Emma might be allowed to come closer. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke, and other tourists nearby fell silent. Watching the scene unfold, for several long seconds, nothing happened. Corporal Fletcher remained frozen in position, giving no indication he had even heard the request. David's heart sank, and he began to turn away, ready to tell Emma that they had tried but it was not possible. Rules were rules, and he understood that military discipline could not be broken for every request, no matter how heartfelt. But then something remarkable happened. Corporal Fletcher's hand moved slightly, a tiny gesture that broke his statuesque pose. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. He had heard the request, and more importantly, he was considering it. Years of training competed with human compassion in that moment. On one side stood regulations, duty, and the expectations of his position. On the other side sat a little girl in a wheelchair whose only wish was to touch a horse. The other guards nearby maintained their positions, but a few had noticed Fletcher's slight movement. In the crowd, people began to realize something unusual was happening. Phones came out, not to take typical tourist photos, but because people sensed they might witness something special. The atmosphere changed from routine sightseeing to collective anticipation. Rachel squeezed David's hand, hardly daring to hope. Thomas stopped, jumping, and stood still, watching the guard on the big black horse. Emma sat in her wheelchair, her small hands gripping the armrests, her eyes never leaving Wellington. She did not fully understand what her father had asked, or whether it might be granted. She only knew that she was closer to a real horse than she had ever been before. And that alone felt like magic. Corporal Fletcher faced a choice that transcended military protocols. He thought about why he had joined the household cavalry, about service, and what it truly meant. He thought about the symbolic role he played, and whether that symbol could bend, just this once, to acknowledge a deeper human connection. He looked down at the little girl in the wheelchair, saw her face full of hope and innocent love, and made a decision that would ripple far beyond that moment, touching hearts across the world in ways he could never have imagined. Corporal James Fletcher had served in the household cavalry for 6 years. He had participated in countless ceremonies, stood guard through rain and sun, and maintained his composure through every distraction tourists could devise. He knew the regulations by heart. Guards were not to break formation, speak to civilians, or allow interaction with their horses during duty hours. These rules existed for good reasons, maintaining the dignity and security of royal ceremonies. But James was more than a guard. Before joining the military, he had grown up on a small farm in Wales. His family had kept horses, and he remembered learning to ride as a young boy. More importantly, he remembered his younger sister, who had been born with cerebral palsy. She had faced challenges similar to Emma's, experiencing the world differently than other children. James had seen how animals, particularly the family horses, had brought his sister joy that nothing else could match. As he sat atop Wellington, looking down at the little girl whose eyes held the same wonder his sister's eyes once had, Wellington, the horse beneath him, seemed to sense something too. The animal had been specially trained for ceremonial duties, accustomed to crowds, noise, and the discipline required for the role. But horses are remarkably intuitive creatures. Wellington shifted slightly, his ears moving toward the direction of Emma's wheelchair. It was as if the horse understood that something meaningful was happening. James made his decision. In a voice quiet enough that only those nearby could hear, he spoke to Emma's father. He said that Emma could approach, but very slowly and calmly. He would guide her hand to touch Wellington's neck. The words were barely out of his mouth before David was moving, tears already streaming down his face. He quickly explained the instructions to Emma, whose expression transformed from hopeful anticipation to pure radiant joy. Rachel helped David lift Emma from her wheelchair. The little girl's legs could not support her weight, so her father carried her carefully toward the horse. Other guards maintained their positions, but several had noticed what was happening. Some might have felt James was breaking protocol, but others understood the humanity of the moment. They remained silent, neither approving nor disapproving, simply allowing it to unfold. The crowd of tourists had swelled as word spread that something unusual was happening. People stopped their own sightseeing to watch. A respectful hush fell over the area. Strangers who moments before had been jostling for photos now stood quietly, sensing they were witnessing something more important than any scheduled ceremony. Dozens of phones recorded the scene, but for once, the act of filming felt less intrusive and more like collective testimony to something beautiful. David carried Emma right up to Wellington's side. The horse stood perfectly still, as if he too understood the significance of the moment. James leaned down slightly, breaking his rigid posture fully now. He spoke softly to Emma, telling her the horse's name and explaining that Wellington was very gentle. He asked if she was ready to touch him. Emma nodded, unable to speak through her emotions. Her small hand reached out, trembling slightly with excitement and nervousness. David supported her carefully, holding her steady as she stretched toward the magnificent animal. The distance seemed both incredibly short and impossibly far. Everything else faded away. There was no crowd, no ceremony, no cameras. There was only a little girl and a horse, and the moment when their worlds would finally touch. Emma's fingertips made contact with Wellington's neck, The horse's coat was warm and smooth, his muscles powerful beneath the surface. Emma gasped, a sound that was part laugh and part sob. Her hand pressed more firmly against the horse, feeling the animal's heartbeat, the rise and fall of his breathing, the living warmth of a creature she had only dreamed about touching. James watched Emma's face and felt his own eyes growing wet. He was a trained soldier, taught to control emotions and maintain professional distance. But this was different. This was a reminder of why service mattered, why the symbols and ceremonies existed in the first place. They were meant to represent something larger than individual rules, something about community, compassion, and the bonds that connect people across all differences. Wellington remained perfectly calm throughout, as if the horse understood his role in this moment. Animals often seem to have a sixth sense about people who need gentleness, and Wellington demonstrated that sensitivity now. He did not move or startle, he simply stood, allowing this little girl to experience a dream she had carried for all her young life. Emma's hand moved slowly along Wellington's neck, exploring the feel of his coat, the contours of his powerful frame. She leaned forward in her father's arms, pressing her cheek against the horse's side. David held her securely, his own tears falling freely now. He whispered to his daughter, asking her how it felt. Emma could only say one word through her tears of joy. Perfect. It felt perfect. Rachel stood nearby with Thomas, both of them crying openly. Rachel had spent 8 years watching her daughter face challenges that other children never knew. She had seen Emma struggle with physical therapy, endure medical procedures, and cope with the reality that her body would not do everything she wanted it to do. But she had also seen Emma's spirit remain unbroken, her capacity for joy intact, despite everything. This moment, watching Emma touch a horse for the first time, was everything Rachel had hoped for when they planned this trip. The tourists watching began to cry too. Strangers who did not know Emma's name or her story found themselves moved by the simple beauty of what they witnessed. Some had their own children with disabilities. Others simply recognized the universal longing to experience something beautiful and the profound gift of having that longing. Fulfilled, the scene transcended language and culture. It was purely human, purely emotional, purely real. James allowed the moment to continue for several minutes, far longer than any strict interpretation of protocol would permit. He spoke quietly to Emma, telling her about Wellington, about how the horse loved carrots and apples, about his gentle nature despite his size. Emma listened, her hand never leaving Wellington's coat, absorbing every word and every sensation. Other members of the household cavalry who were positioned nearby faced their own choices. They could have intervened, reminded James of regulations, and ended the interaction. Instead, they chose silence and implicit support. They understood that some moments mattered more than rules, that compassion and human connection were part of service too. Perhaps the most important part? Finally, James gently told Emma that it was time to step back. The ceremony would continue, and he needed to resume his position. Emma nodded, understanding even through her joy that this special moment had to end. She leaned forward one more time, pressing her face against Wellington's neck, whispering something that only the horse could hear. Then David carefully carried her back to her wheelchair. As David settled Emma back into her chair, something unexpected happened. The crowd that had watched in silence suddenly erupted in applause. It started with a few people and spread rapidly, until hundreds were clapping, many still crying, celebrating what they had witnessed. The applause was not for entertainment or performance. It was recognition of something genuine, an acknowledgement that they had seen compassion triumph over convention, that they had been privileged to witness a moment of pure human kindness. Corporal James Fletcher straightened in his saddle, returning to his formal position as the applause continued around him. His face resumed its professional neutrality, but those who looked closely could see the moisture in his eyes. Wellington stood still beneath him, the horse seeming almost proud of his role in what had just transpired. The ceremony would continue as scheduled, but everyone present knew they had witnessed something far more meaningful than any traditional display. Emma sat in her wheelchair, her hands pressed against her heart, tears still streaming down her face. She kept looking back at Wellington, as if afraid that looking away might make the memory less real. Her parents crouched beside her, and the three of them shared a moment of pure family connection. Thomas, young as he was, seemed to understand that his sister had experienced something special. He took her hand and squeezed it, offering his own 6-year-old version of support and celebration. Among the crowd, a woman named Margaret Stevens had recorded the entire interaction on her phone. Margaret was a retired teacher who had spent 40 years working with children with special needs. She had come to London to visit her daughter and had stumbled upon this scene by accident. As she watched her phone screen, reviewing what she had captured, she knew immediately that this video needed to be shared. This was not just a family memory. This was a story the world needed to see. That evening, Margaret uploaded the video to social media with a simple caption describing what she had witnessed. She went to sleep thinking perhaps a few friends might watch and appreciate the moment. She had no idea she had just sparked something that would spread across the globe. By morning, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. By the end of the week, that number would climb to over 50 million, shared and reshared across every continent. The response was overwhelming. Comments came from people in every corner of the world, many sharing their own stories of children with disabilities, of small acts of kindness that had made enormous differences, of moments when someone had bent the rules to acknowledge someone's humanity. Parents of children with special needs wrote about how the video made them cry, how it reminded them that compassion still existed, how it gave them hope that the world might be kinder than they sometimes feared. News organizations picked up the story. Television programs requested interviews with the Morrison family. Newspapers wanted to know more about Emma, about Corporal Fletcher, and about how this beautiful moment had come to happen. The attention was sudden and intense, and the Morrison family found themselves at the center of a global conversation about kindness, disability rights, and the power of small gestures. David and Rachel were initially hesitant about all the attention. They were private people who had simply wanted to give their daughter a special experience. They had not sought publicity or recognition. But as they read the messages pouring in from around the world, they realized this story had become bigger than their family. It had touched something universal, and people were responding because they hungered for good news, for evidence that humanity and compassion still mattered. Emma, for her part, was overwhelmed by the response, but also thrilled. Other children with disabilities reached out through their parents, sharing their own dreams and challenges. Emma received letters and drawings from kids around the world. A girl in Australia wrote about her dream to swim with dolphins. A boy in Japan shared his love of trains and his hope to drive one someday. Emma's experience had inspired others to voice their own hopes, creating a ripple effect of openness and connection. The military establishment had to respond to the attention as well. Some officials initially worried about protocol violations and the precedent this might set. Rules existed for reasons, and allowing one exception could lead to chaos. But the public reaction was so overwhelmingly positive that criticism seemed petty and tone-deaf. The Ministry of Defense ultimately issued a statement praising Corporal Fletcher for demonstrating the values of service and compassion that the military represented. Behind the scenes, James Fletcher had some anxious days, wondering whether he would face disciplinary action. His commanding officers called him in for meetings where they reviewed the incident in detail. James explained his reasoning, his memory of his sister, and his belief that some moments required human judgment to override standard procedures. He was prepared to accept consequences if his superiors deemed his actions inappropriate. The decision came down from higher levels of command than James had expected. Not only would he face no punishment, but he would be commended for his actions. A senior general sent a personal message stating that James had upheld the finest traditions of service by recognizing that their ultimate duty was to the people they served, not just to ceremonial protocols. The military, often criticized for rigidity, showed unexpected flexibility and wisdom in their response. Wellington, the horse, became something of a celebrity himself. The household cavalry received requests from disability organizations asking if there might be ways for other children to have similar experiences. The military began exploring the possibility of structured programs that would allow supervised interactions between their ceremonial horses and children with special needs. What had started as one spontaneous moment was potentially becoming a formal program that could bring joy to thousands. Emma's story also sparked broader conversations about accessibility and inclusion. Disability rights advocates pointed out that Emma's profound joy at touching a horse revealed how many basic experiences remained out of reach for people with physical limitations. Farms, zoos, and other animal-centered attractions began reviewing their accessibility features, looking for ways to make encounters with animals possible for everyone. Regardless of physical ability, some farms specifically reached out to the Morrison family, offering Emma opportunities to visit and interact with their animals. A sanctuary for rescued horses in Kent invited Emma for a special day where she could not only touch but also participate in feeding and grooming horses. These invitations came from genuine desire to share with a child who had touched hearts, not from publicity seeking. Emma's calendar filled with magical experiences that extended and deepened that first perfect moment at Buckingham Palace. The video continued to spread, transcending its original context. It was shown in schools as an example of empathy and kindness. Disability advocacy groups used it in presentations about inclusion and the importance of small accommodations. Psychology professors showed it in classes about human connection and emotional intelligence. That brief interaction between a guard, a horse, and a little girl became a teaching tool across multiple disciplines and contexts. International. Media coverage brought the story to countries far from Britain. In places where the monarchy meant little, people still connected with the universal elements of the story. A father's love for his daughter, a soldier's compassion, a child's pure joy at experiencing something she had always dreamed about. These themes needed no cultural translation. They spoke to fundamental human experiences that everyone could understand and appreciate. Emma herself handled the attention with remarkable grace for an 8-year-old. In interviews, she was articulate and charming, speaking about her love for animals and her gratitude to Corporal Fletcher in Wellington. She used her platform to talk about other children with disabilities, encouraging people to see abilities rather than limitations. Her maturity and positive spirit impressed everyone who met her, and she became an inadvertent spokesperson for inclusion and accessibility. Rachel and David watched their daughter grow in confidence as the weeks passed. The attention could have been overwhelming, but Emma seemed energized by it. She had lived much of her life watching from the sidelines, unable to participate in activities other children took for granted. Now she was at the center of something positive, and the experience was transformative. Her parents saw their already strong daughter become even stronger. More confident in her voice, in her place in the world, James Fletcher and the Morrison family eventually met privately, away from cameras and public scrutiny. James wanted to meet Emma again without the pressure of performance or publicity. They spent an afternoon together at the cavalry barracks, where Emma got to see Wellington again and meet other horses as well. James and his sister, who also attended, shared stories with Emma about growing up with disabilities and the importance of finding people who understand and support you. That private meeting was never publicized or recorded. It remained a personal connection between people who had touched each other's lives in unexpected ways. James told Emma that she had reminded him why he served, that her joy had been a gift to him as much as his gesture had been to her. Emma, in her straightforward 8-year-old way, told James he was her hero. The simplicity and sincerity of that statement moved James more than any military commendation ever could. As autumn arrived, the immediate frenzy around the video began to settle, but its impact continued to ripple outward in ways both large and small. The Morrison family returned to their normal life in their small northern town, but nothing felt quite the same. Emma went back to school, where her classmates treated her like a celebrity. Teachers reported that other students showed increased sensitivity and kindness toward Emma and other children with special needs. One moment of compassion had created a culture shift in an entire school community. The local news followed up with the family, documenting how their lives had changed. Emma's bedroom, already filled with horse pictures, now included framed photos of her meeting Wellington. She had letters and cards from children around the world pinned to a bulletin board. Her parents had created a special box to hold all the gifts and well wishes that continued arriving. Emma read through the messages regularly, each one reinforcing that her experience had meant something to people she would never meet. David returned to his job as a mechanic. But co-workers constantly asked about Emma and shared how the video had affected them. Several mentioned they had changed how they thought about people with disabilities. One coworker admitted he had always felt awkward around people in wheelchairs, not knowing what to say or how to act. Watching Emma's joy and seeing her treated with such dignity had helped him understand that people with disabilities were simply people with their own dreams, hopes, and desires for connection. Rachel, who worked part-time as a library assistant, found that parents of children with disabilities sought her out. They wanted advice, support, and simply someone who understood their journey. Rachel began organizing informal support groups at the library, creating a space where families could share experiences and resources. What had started with a horse encounter was now building community connections that would support families for years to come. The household cavalry followed, threw on their commitment to create structured programs for children with special needs. They developed guidelines that would allow supervised interactions with the ceremonial horses during specific times. The program required careful planning, coordinating with disability organizations, training guards on appropriate interactions, and establishing safety protocols. 6 months after Emma's encounter, the program officially launched with Emma as the guest of honor at the inaugural event. A dozen children with various disabilities participated in that first official program. Each child got to meet a horse, learn about the cavalry, and experience a moment similar to what Emma had experienced. The guards, including James Fletcher, volunteered their time to make the day special. They spoke to the children with respect and warmth, treating them as honored guests rather than objects of pity. The children left with memories they would treasure forever, and the guards gained new appreciation for the impact they could have beyond ceremonial duties. Wellington became the unofficial mascot of the program. Something about his gentle nature made him perfect for these interactions. Handlers noted that the horse seemed to understand when children with special needs approached. He stood even more still than usual, lowering his head slightly to make contact easier. It was as if that first interaction with Emma had awakened something in Wellington, a sense of purpose beyond marching and ceremonies. The program's success led to requests from other military units around the world. Armed forces in Canada, Australia, and several European countries reached out to learn about the initiative. They wanted to create similar programs, recognizing that military service could include making meaningful connections with vulnerable members of society. What had started as one corporal's spontaneous decision was becoming an international movement toward more compassionate and inclusive military community engagement media. Attention also brought scrutiny and questions. Some disability advocates raised concerns about whether the focus on Emma's story promoted a problematic narrative. They worried it suggested that people with disabilities needed special treatment, or that their joy came from able-bodied people granting them favors. These were legitimate concerns that sparked important conversations about representation, autonomy, and the difference between inclusion and inspiration exploitation. Emma's parents took these criticisms seriously. They made conscious efforts in interviews to emphasize Emma's agency and capabilities, not just her disabilities. They talked about her academic achievements, her sense of humor, her friendships, and her dreams for the future. Emma herself participated in panels about disability rights, where she spoke about wanting to be seen as a complete person, not just as her wheelchair or her condition. The horse encounter was special, but it was not the defining moment of her existence. Academic researchers became interested in the story as well. Psychologists studied the video and the public response, analyzing what made this particular moment so universally moving. They identified several factors, including the clear emotion on Emma's face, the breaking of formal protocol for humanitarian reasons, and the involvement of symbols of authority showing compassion. The research helped explain why certain stories and images spread virally while others do not, contributing to understanding of social media dynamics and emotional contagion. Organizations serving people with disabilities reported increased donations and volunteer applications. In the months following the video's spread, people who had never considered this area of service were inspired to get involved. Some volunteers specifically mentioned Emma's story as their motivation. saying they wanted to help create more moments of joy and inclusion for people facing challenges. The ripple effect of that single interaction was generating tangible resources for communities in need. Schools incorporated the story into their curricula, using it to teach about empathy, kindness, and standing up for what is right, even when it means breaking rules. Teachers reported productive discussions about when rules should be followed and when human judgment should prevail. Students debated the ethics of James Fletcher's decision, considering multiple perspectives and developing their own moral reasoning skills. One story became a tool for teaching critical thinking and ethical decision-making. Emma's relationship with horses continued to deepen. She joined an adaptive riding program where specially trained instructors helped children with physical disabilities learn to ride. The program used equipment and techniques that made riding accessible regardless of physical limitations. For Emma, who had once thought simply touching a horse was an impossible dream, actually riding became a reality. She discovered talents and strengths she had not known she possessed. The riding instructor, Patricia Chen, had worked with adaptive riding for 20 years. She said Emma was one of the most naturally gifted students she had ever taught. Despite her physical challenges, Emma had an intuitive understanding of horses and fearless determination. Patricia believed that Emma's deep love and respect for horses, cultivated through years of dreaming, made her connection with them particularly strong. The animals responded to Emma's genuine affection with trust and cooperation. James Fletcher continued his military service, but the encounter with Emma had changed him too. He became an advocate within the military for community engagement programs. He spoke at training sessions about the importance of remembering the human element of service. He encouraged younger soldiers to think beyond regulations and consider the broader impact of their actions and choices. His reputation grew not just as a skilled soldier, but as someone who understood that true service meant connecting with and supporting the community. James's own sister, Catherine, found new purpose as well. Watching the video of James and Emma had reminded her of her own struggles and triumphs. She began volunteering with disability organizations, mentoring young people facing challenges similar to those she had overcome. She spoke at schools about her experiences and encouraged students with disabilities to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. The connection between James and Emma had sparked positive change in Catherine's life too. The one-year anniversary of the encounter brought renewed media attention. News organizations did follow-up stories on how the families had changed and how the programs inspired by that moment had developed. Emma, now 9 years old and more confident than ever, participated in interviews alongside James Fletcher. Their bond, formed in that spontaneous moment, had deepened into genuine friendship. They stayed in contact regularly, sharing updates about their lives and supporting each other. During the anniversary coverage, Emma revealed something she had not shared before. She explained that touching Wellington had been wonderful, but what mattered even more was feeling seen and valued. She said that Corporal Fletcher had looked at her and seen not a disability or a problem to be managed, but a person with a dream that deserved respect. That recognition of her full humanity was the real gift, one that the horse encounter symbolized, but extended far beyond. James, when asked about that day, said he had simply done what felt right in the moment. He had not planned to become a symbol or to start a movement. He had seen a little girl who wanted to touch a horse, and he had found a way to make that happen. The fact that this simple act of kindness had resonated with millions of people around the world suggested to him that people were hungry for reminders that compassion and human connection still mattered, in an often harsh world too. Years after the encounter that had captured hearts worldwide, Emma Morrison celebrated her 10th birthday with a party at an equestrian center. The celebration was modest and private, attended by family and close friends rather than media or strangers. But among the guests was James Fletcher, now promoted to sergeant, who arrived with a special surprise. He had arranged for Wellington to be transported to the center for the day, giving Emma a chance to spend extended time with the horse who had become such an important part of her story. Emma's reaction when she saw Wellington arrive was everything her parents had hoped for. She burst into tears of joy, wheeling herself as fast as she could toward the trailer. Wellington seemed to remember her too, his ears pricking forward when he saw Emma approaching. The horse whinnied softly, a sound that those present interpreted as recognition and greeting. Whether horses truly remember individual people was debatable among experts. But everyone watching that day chose to believe that Wellington knew exactly who Emma was. The afternoon was magical. Emma spent hours with Wellington, brushing his coat, offering him carrots, and simply being in his presence. Her riding instructor had arranged for Emma to ride Wellington using adaptive equipment, fulfilling another dream Emma had barely dared to imagine. As she sat atop the magnificent horse with James walking alongside for safety, Emma felt a sense of freedom and power that transcended her physical limitations. Up there, she was not a girl in a wheelchair. She was a rider, capable and strong. The other children at the party, including Emma's brother Thomas, who was now 8, watched in awe. Several of Emma's friends also had various disabilities, and they took turns meeting Wellington and the other horses at the center. The party became an impromptu celebration of possibility and inclusion. Parents who had worried about their children's limitations saw them laughing and confident, experiencing joy without qualification or reservation. It was exactly what Emma had wanted, to share the gift she had been given. During a quiet moment, James and Emma's father, David, talked about how that single encounter had changed trajectories. David admitted he had been hesitant to ask that day at Buckingham Palace, afraid of rejection and embarrassment. He thanked James not just for saying yes, but for responding with such genuine warmth and respect. James replied that David's courage in advocating for his daughter had made the moment possible. Nothing would have happened. They discussed the programs that had emerged from that day. The Household Cavalry Initiative had now served over 300 children with disabilities. Other organizations had created similar programs. An international network of therapeutic riding centers had grown, partly inspired by the attention Emma's story brought to adaptive equestrian activities. What had started as one moment between one girl and one horse had become a movement, improving lives across multiple continents. Emma herself had become an advocate in ways her parents never anticipated. She spoke at conferences about disability rights and inclusion. She had started a blog where she wrote about her experiences and interviewed other young people with disabilities. Her writing was remarkably mature for a 10-year-old, showing insight and empathy beyond her years. Teachers predicted Emma would do remarkable things as she grew older, perhaps in advocacy, writing, or work with animals. The attention had not been without challenges. Emma's family had received some negative responses over the years, people accusing them of exploiting Emma's disabilities for attention or claiming the story was manufactured for publicity. These criticisms hurt, particularly because the family had not sought attention initially. They had simply wanted to give their daughter a special experience. But Rachel and David had learned to focus on the positive impact and ignore those who insisted on finding fault. Emma had also dealt with complicated feelings about being known primarily for her disabilities rather than her other qualities. She was an excellent student, particularly gifted in creative writing and science. She had a wonderful sense of humor and a talent for making friends. But when people met her, they often immediately referenced the video and the horse encounter, defining her by that single moment rather than seeing her full person. Emma learned to gracefully redirect conversations while also accepting that the encounter was part of her story. Even if it was not her complete story, Wellington continued in his ceremonial role. But handlers noted the horse seemed to have gained something from his interactions with Emma and other children in the program. He was calmer and more patient, even by the high standards of ceremonial horses. Some handlers joked that Wellington had found his calling as a therapy horse disguised as a military mount. There was discussion about eventually transitioning Wellington to full-time work with disability programs when he retired from active ceremonial duty. James Fletcher's military career flourished. His compassionate response to Emma had demonstrated leadership qualities that his superiors valued. He was given increased responsibility in training new guards, where he emphasized the importance of representing the military with both discipline and humanity. He told recruits that the public did not just need soldiers who could follow orders. But soldiers who understood when compassion and human connection were part of their duty, the broader impact on the household, cavalry was significant. The regiment had always been prestigious, but the program with children with disabilities added a new dimension to their public service. Recruitment actually increased after the program launched, with young people citing the regiment's commitment to community service as a factor in their decision to enlist. The military, often perceived as rigid and cold, was demonstrating that strength and compassion were not contradictory, but complementary. International recognition came in unexpected forms. Emma and James were invited to speak at the United Nations on International Day of Persons with Disabilities. They shared their story and talked about the importance of inclusion, accessibility, and seeing beyond physical limitations. Emma, standing at the podium with her father's support, spoke about how one act of kindness had opened doors she had not known existed. Her speech was mature beyond her years, moving several delegates to tears. James spoke about military service extending beyond national defense, to include service to the most vulnerable members of society. He challenged other military organizations to consider how they could use their resources and visibility to support people with disabilities. His words carried weight because he spoke not as a politician or activist, but as a soldier who had simply tried to do the right thing and had seen the profound impact such choices could have. The media coverage of their UN appearance brought the story full circle, reminding the world of the original encounter and showing how far the ripples had spread. New audiences discovered the video for the first time, many unaware of the backstory. Comment sections filled with people expressing gratitude for the reminder that kindness existed, that protocols could sometimes bend for humanity, and that one person's compassion could inspire thousands of others. Back in Britain, Emma's school created a special program inspired by her advocacy work. They partnered with local organizations serving people with disabilities to create mentorship opportunities and awareness initiatives. Students without disabilities were paired with peers who had various challenges, not in a patronizing helper relationship, but as equals learning from each other. Emma was proud that her school had taken concrete action rather than just talking about inclusion. Thomas, Emma's younger brother, had grown up watching his sister navigate challenges and opportunities. He developed a maturity and empathy unusual for his age. He stood up for classmates who were bullied or excluded. He questioned rules that did not make sense. His parents realized that Emma's experiences had shaped Thomas too, teaching him lessons about justice, compassion, and standing up for others that would guide him throughout his life. Rachel and David reflected often on that day at Buckingham Palace. They had saved for years to afford the trip, never imagining it would become such a defining moment for their family. They thought about how easily it might not have happened. If they had visited on a different day, if James had been stationed elsewhere, if David had not found the courage to ask if James had strictly followed protocol, so many small factors had aligned to create that perfect moment. The programs inspired by Emma's story had grown beyond anything the original participants could have imagined. The Household Cavalry program had served over 1,000 children and had been replicated by military units in 15 countries. An international conference on military community engagement featured the program as a case study in innovative public service. Military leaders discussed how engaging with vulnerable populations strengthened rather than weakened their organizations. Building community trust and giving service members meaningful connection to the people they served. Emma herself had become a sought-after speaker, despite her young age. She addressed conferences, school assemblies, and community groups about disability rights and inclusion. Her message was consistent and powerful. People with disabilities were not looking for pity or special treatment, but for recognition of their full humanity and removal of barriers that prevented them from participating fully in society. She spoke from experience but also from research. Having become remarkably knowledgeable about disability history, law, and advocacy strategies, her advocacy work had not been without personal cost. Emma sometimes felt exhausted by the expectation that she would always be inspirational and positive. She wanted space to be a normal teenager, to have bad days, to complain about homework and argue with her brother without everything being interpreted through the lens of her disability. Her parents worked to protect her privacy and ensure she had time to simply be 13, not always the face of a movement. Thomas, now 11, had developed his own path. Inspired by his sister and the horses that had been part of their family story, he was training to become an equine veterinarian. He volunteered at stables, learning about horse care and medicine. His dream was to work specifically with therapy horses and adaptive riding programs. Continuing the legacy his family had become part of, the encounter that had changed Emma's life had shaped Thomas's future as well. The Morrison family received a special invitation 5 years after the original encounter. The household cavalry was hosting a celebration marking the 5th anniversary of their children's program, and they wanted Emma as the guest of honor. The event would also serve as Wellington's official retirement ceremony, a chance to honor the horse who had touched so many lives. Emma was thrilled at the prospect of seeing Wellington again and celebrating what they had started together. The ceremony took place on a perfect spring day. Hundreds attended, including many families who had participated in the program over the years. Children who had met Wellington and other horses lined up to say goodbye and thank you to the retiring horse. Each child had their own story of how that encounter had affected them, their own version of the magic Emma had experienced. Together, their stories formed a tapestry of hope and transformation. Wellington, groomed to perfection, seemed to understand the significance of the day. He stood patiently as child after child approached, offering treats and gentle pats. His eyes, kind and wise, watched each child with the same attentiveness he had shown Emma 5 years earlier. Handlers wiped away tears as they watched the old horse, who had served so faithfully, continue giving comfort and joy even in retirement. Emma's speech at the ceremony was the highlight of the day. She spoke about that morning 5 years ago, when she had been a nervous 8-year-old who just wanted to touch a horse. She thanked James Fletcher for his courage and breaking protocol for compassion. She thanked Wellington for his gentle patience. But mostly, she thanked all the people who had taken that one moment and built something lasting from it. She reminded everyone that change started with individual actions, with people choosing kindness over convenience, with recognizing the humanity in everyone regardless of physical ability. James spoke as well, reflecting on how that spontaneous decision had changed his understanding of service. He admitted he had worried about consequences in the moment, but he had known it was right. He encouraged everyone present to trust those instincts when they arose, to choose compassion even when it felt risky, to remember that rules served people and not the other way around. His words resonated with military personnel and civilians alike, a reminder that courage took many forms. The ceremony concluded with Wellington being led to a trailer that would take him to his new home at the Therapeutic Riding Center. Emma was given the honor of leading him, her hand on his halter. Walking beside the horse who had become such an important part of her story, cameras captured the image of the teenage girl and the aging horse walking together, both of them having given so much to others, both of them embodying the power of connection and compassion. At Wellington's new home, Emma visited regularly. She volunteered as a junior instructor, working with children experiencing horses for the first time. She saw her own 8-year-old self in their faces, the nervousness and excitement and wonder. She used her own experience to help them understand that touching a horse or riding one did not fix everything or erase challenges, but it did remind them of their own capacity for joy and accomplishment. Those reminders mattered perhaps more than anything else. The original video, now 5 years old, continued finding new audiences. It had been viewed over 200 million times across various platforms. It appeared in compilation videos of heartwarming moments, in presentations about viral content, and in lessons about social media's power to spread positive messages. Researchers had studied it extensively, trying to understand what made it so universally appealing. The consensus was that it captured something fundamentally human, a moment of pure connection that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. Emma's parents sometimes watched the video together late at night, still amazed by everything that had grown from that single moment. They thought about all the decisions that had led them to that place at that time. They remembered being nervous about the expense of the trip, about whether Emma would enjoy London, about whether they were doing enough to give their children good lives despite challenges. They never could have imagined that a simple request to let their daughter touch a horse would ripple outward to affect thousands of lives across the world. As Emma entered her teenage years, she began thinking about her future in new ways. She wanted to work with animals, perhaps as a veterinarian like her brother hoped to be, or maybe in animal-assisted therapy programs. She also wanted to continue advocacy work, ensuring that future generations of children with disabilities would have more opportunities and face fewer barriers than she had. She dreamed of writing books, both about her experiences and about other topics entirely, proving that she was more than her disability or her viral moment. James Fletcher, watching Emma grow into a confident teenager, felt proud of the small role he had played in her journey. He knew Emma would have been remarkable regardless of their encounter. Her spirit, intelligence, and determination were entirely her own. But he was grateful that his decision to break protocol had opened doors for her and for so many others. It reinforced his belief that the best service was rooted in seeing and responding to individual human needs, even when doing so required flexibility and courage. The story of Emma, James, and Wellington became part of British cultural memory, a modern parable about kindness and inclusion. It was referenced in speeches, cited in articles about disability rights, and used as an example of viral content that actually made a positive difference. Unlike so many internet sensations that faded quickly, this story had endurance because it represented something people wanted to believe about humanity, that compassion existed and could triumph over rigid rules and social barriers. On the 10th anniversary, still years in the future, there would undoubtedly be more celebrations and reflections. But the real legacy was not in anniversaries or documentaries. It was in the thousands of children who had met horses through programs inspired by Emma's story. It was in the military personnel who had learned that service included compassion. It was in the parents who had seen their children celebrated rather than pitied. It was in the communities that had become more inclusive and accessible. Emma understood that legacy better than anyone. She knew she was just one girl who had been fortunate enough to have her moment captured and shared. She knew there were countless other children with disabilities whose dreams went unfulfilled, whose stories remained untold. She carried that awareness as both responsibility and motivation. If her visibility could help others, if her voice could advocate for those without platforms, then the attention and the pressure were worthwhile. As the ceremony ended and guests began departing, Emma spent a final few minutes alone with Wellington at his new home. She pressed her forehead against his neck, just as she had 5 years earlier, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for standing still. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for being part of something beautiful." Wellington nickered softly, his breath warm against her hair. A gentle giant who had given so much and asked for nothing in return except kindness and care. The sun set over the equestrian center, casting golden light across the paddocks where Wellington would spend his retirement years. Emma wheeled herself back toward her family, carrying with her the memories of an encounter that had changed her life and the determination to ensure that other children would have their own moments of magic and inclusion. The story that had begun with a simple request to touch a horse had become something far greater, a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of advocacy, and the beautiful truth that one moment of kindness could ripple outward forever, touching lives in ways impossible to predict or measure, but absolutely real and profoundly meaningful.